everyone. So for this month's instructional how-to, I'm going to talk about how I create rocks and a couple different techniques that I use. So to start with, I went ahead and painted my base layer of brown on here, and I left a lot of the brush strokes in there so that you could kind of already see some texture building up. My next step is going to be to go in with kind of a medium-sized filbert brush like this, and I'm going to go in with some mixture of brown and a lot of white, and I'm going to paint in a few little rocky areas on here, kind of like I already started doing here, but kind of just filling in a few rocks in there. And I'll kind of vary the colors that I'm using. I might do some darker ones in here too. And it's all about building up texture. Might even go in and change some of those a little bit. So right now I'm adding in a few rocks, and then I may go back in. I will go back in with some magazine pages, and I'll be doing that as well, adding some collage. Now, usually when I collage rocks, I'll get a magazine that I'm interested in for the colors and textures and patterns, and it can be pretty much any magazine. And I start looking through to find some good textures that I like. I really like, in this particular page, I like the texture and even the colors of the ocean right there. So what I'm gonna do is just rip out that little piece, and then I'll set it aside to use. And I'm just gonna basically be collecting some different colors, different shades of grays and browns and purples for my rocks. This right here would also make really good rock texture. It's kind of a grayish brownish green. And I'll just keep collecting as I go. One thing I will mention is when I'm looking at the magazines, I do tend to try to find a lot of more complex patterns and texture in there. And you'll see why as I start to paint the rocks. But this is actually a rock photograph of a rocky cliffside, so that obviously works well as well. But there's always some surprising patterns in this too. I think I ended up ripping out a couple pieces from like some fried chicken and that kind of thing too, to get some interesting textures and patterns in there. So I think I have enough. I'll go ahead and get this piece in case I want to do anything with some lighter rocks. I'll get this gray over here too. So I think I have enough to get started. So our next step will be to go ahead and start figuring out the rock shapes that we want in here. Okay, so for this next step, we're going to be working on making rocks using collage. And so we'll take those pieces that you ripped out of the magazines and we will be Mod Podging them on. So I'll be using some of this and using a technique that I often use to attach the book pages and things like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is decide on the area where I'm wanting to add a rock. And I'm going to start by just kind of ripping some pieces of paper, and it depends on how much texture you want. The smaller rips that you put in there, the more texture you'll have. And also when you're ripping, you'll notice that sometimes you'll get this nice white edge on there. On other sides you won't, and it just depends on how you're ripping the paper. So if you want more white edges on there, you kind of want to pay attention to how you're ripping that. So I'm just gonna rip up a bunch of different pieces here and figure out sort of how I wanna place them. It usually ends up changing as I go, but I'll do some sort of rock here. So what I'm gonna do, I move that off to the side, take my Mod Podge on my brush, just like paint, and I'm gonna just paint the area where I'm wanting those pages. I'm gonna take my first piece and I'll set it on there, and I'll paint the Mod Podge over the top as well. And that helps to adhere it on there and helps to kind of press it down so that I don't have bubbles on there either. And then as I go, I may end up changing things around as far as the placement of everything goes, depending on my pieces and kind of what I'm thinking for the texture. You're not locked in to any of the colors that you're using, and I'll talk about that as well. Let's do some white there, and then I'm gonna rip this a little bit more and try to kind of build that coming down. And it looks like I might need one more piece there as well. Actually, maybe a couple pieces. So this one's kind of a bigger rock. And you can go back as you wish. I don't really want the text on there for this one, so I'm going to cover that up. And that looks pretty good for that one. I think I'm also going to do kind of a series of rocks over there. But I think for my next one, for this purpose of demonstration, I think I'll do it up here. So again, kind of picking and choosing, and maybe I want to do a gray rock. That could be kind of different. Okay, so we'll rip those pieces. I like that white edge in there. And then we'll look through, and it looks like this is also some gray, but maybe a little darker, so that might be good too. Okay. All right, the last technique that I'll talk about for this particular lesson, how-to video, is some things that you can do over the top of the collage once you have that done. One of the things I like to do, especially if I have kind of a darker rock like this with a lot of texture, is I like to go in with some paint and kind of paint it, a watered down paint, so that you can still see the texture underneath. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick too, so you can see that. And so what I'm going to do is go in with kind of a smaller filbert brush, and that's one of these flat round tip brushes here. And I'm going to add some of the paint, and it's going to be the same colors that I was playing with on the hillside there. So I'm going to start with kind of this darker brown. And then what I like to do, instead of mixing the colors, I like to just dip my brush in the paint. And it's a wet brush. So when I say that the paint is watered down, it's not really watered down on my palette. It's just that I have a wet brush that I'm using. And so you'll see as I go, I'm doing a lot of scrubbing, and I'm shaking the camera because of that, but I'm doing a lot of scrubbing with my brush, and that can end up messing up your brushes a little bit, but it's a good way to get kind of a rougher texture on there. And if you notice your paint is starting to lay a little thick, you can rinse your brush, dab it on a paper towel, and go back in and kind of spread it out a little bit thinner. So you can see how the paper texture is showing through. Some of the darker browns are also showing through there. But it's also kind of blending a little more with my background. Some of the rocks, like this one over here, I'll probably leave as is because I like that texture, but having the ability to paint over the top is really nice, because, you know, if you have some texture that you like but you don't really like the colors, it's a nice way to be able to change that pretty quickly. All right, so that is my rock tutorial. I may be doing another rock tutorial with some new techniques next time. I haven't decided yet. Our hiker is starting to experience a weather change. You can see in the sky there. So I may end up shifting gears a little bit to painting skies and painting weather. Thanks for watching.